Don't move.
Longlegs is the scariest movie that has come out this decade. I have never walked out of a theater after a horror movie feeling so off. The anxiety that this movie left me with has made me still feel kind of jumpy even while I'm writing this the day after. I may spoil the movie, I may not, but for your safety, just assume I'm going to spoil the whole thing. Longlegs is a masterclass on how to unsettle the audience. Every technique used in the film is meant to make the characters seem unsafe. All of the shot reverse shot setups for the characters involve a lot of empty space to plant a seed of doubt on whether or not the characters are alone, and upon rewatch, this was only more apparent as sometimes that unease is validated by there actually being something there, in either shadow or a slow build, by seeing something the characters haven't seen yet. In particular, a moment towards the end regarding a certain scene in a car. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes the characters will be set in front of something that doesn't allow the audience to totally settle in on what should be a low-stress scene. This framing device also works as a way to make the characters in the film all seem so weak and powerless in the situation they're in, while Longlegs or anyone else that he has influenced almost always fills a majority of the screen. This makes scenes in which these two forces are interacting with each other always make it seem like the protagonist, and by extension the audience, never have anything in control or have any power in this film. While we're on the subject of Longlegs, Nicolas Cage gives, in my opinion, the best performance of his career. He is so unsettling and leaves such an impact on every part of the film without actually being in the film all that much. Some of the most frightening moments I have seen on the big screen are completely owed to him, along with the makeup and editing of the film. The very first scene with him, along with the scariest opening credits to ever be put in a film, perfectly set the precedent on how there would be no point of alleviation throughout the whole runtime. Micah Monroe also gives a fantastic performance that really elevates the atmosphere because of her off-putting behavior and social immaturity. I've only seen her in It Follows, and I don't think she did an amazing job in that movie, but Longlegs showed me that she can really put on a performance when she's allowed to. I loved how a lot of the scenes that were flashbacks or seen from a different perspective were filmed in a square resolution. It added a retro vibe and also went with the idea of photography that came back for the best jump scare of any movie I've ever seen, and that's no exaggeration. I don't want to spoil it, but I'll just say that there have only been a few times where I felt a genuine fight or flight response to a moment in a movie. When I saw The Shining for the first time in theaters and the bathtub scene happened, I felt that way a couple of times during the third act of Hereditary, and again I felt it here in that moment. While the movie does have its high points like that, it's great to see a modern horror movie not rely on any cheap jump scares. Longlegs has maybe 3 or 4 throughout the movie, however they are very different to your average jump scares. For the reasons I've already talked about, Longlegs is already seeped in a layer of unease throughout its runtime. However, any scenes that are moving towards a jump scare are constructed perfectly. This is a little bit of a rant about modern horror movies, but most modern horror movies set up their jump scares by having a character be by themselves or being off guard. This is the first tell. Then there's a long music cue that keeps building and building before finally trailing off for a few seconds of silence. Then the jump scare happens and the music kicks back in louder than ever. And I'm so sorry if you like movies that do their scares like this. I like the Conjuring movies too. Well, at least the first 2. But this formula just isn't scary. There might as well be a bright red sign in the corner of the screen that says spooky things afoot. The imagery might be a bit unsettling, but it doesn't mean anything because I'm already fully prepped to see some fucked up shit. Some could argue that the suspense is the desired emotion and it's actually quite successful as a method of eliciting a reaction from the audience. But the emotion being evoked isn't fear. It might seem like it is, but it's just anticipation with a slight amount of anxiety. This is a far less impactful way to create tension and fear, and it can lead to a movie feeling like it's made up of a bunch of patterns, and a formula is the farthest thing from being scary. Alternatively, some horror movies like to have absolutely no lead-in for the ultimate surprise on the audience. And this can be pretty effective in eliciting fear, however it can often be so bewildering that there isn't even time to process that it was frightening. Sometimes it could even come across as silly. Longlegs has the most perfect jump scares I've ever seen. It doesn't do anything flashy to work up the anticipation for the scare, it creates an atmosphere of escalation and anxiety simply through presentation. A fantastic example of this is seen in the first scene. It opens up with a long shot after a full red studio credits introduction. The shot is murky and looks as though we're looking through a sort of haze. You'll only understand why this shot looks like this on a rewatch, but it's startling and off-putting enough to immediately set the tone. It pulls up to a house where we cut to the interior of a little girl's bedroom in which she looks out the window. We then get her perspective as she looks out the window. It shows us a zoom-in shot of the car we just entered the scene in. Showing these two shots back to back presents the clear danger of the scene, the victim of the scene, and the distance between these two forces. We get some explanatory shots that show the girl getting ready to see the car, and then an exterior shot of the girl walking up to the vehicle. We then hear a sound from behind the girl, and we get a flash of a man peeking out from a corner before dashing behind the house. The girl begins to check out the other side of the house. So far, the setup of the scene is stressful purely through visual communication and slow, methodical camera work and blocking. The melody of the sound of nature, like birds chirping or the crunching of the snow, add a kind of boiling point type feel to the scene as it goes on. Sound cues are added to the mix first when the young girl looks to her right, and then to her left, and then the crescendo. I don't have any footage of it because it just came out, but this is a fantastic opening scene and a perfect example of how to do the jump scare great. While it's still shocking and a little loud, there is no artificial buildup with things added in post like music. It's a perfectly constructed way to build anxiety and fear in the audience without using anything cheap. And then the payoff being not just surprising but genuinely terrifying makes it for such a great way to open the film. And the jump scares I'm talking about are a relatively smaller part of the film. The majority of the fear Longlegs evokes come from other sources, and the plot isn't bad either. The night after I watched this movie for the first time, I went back with a different group of friends, and re-watching this, I noticed just how great of a detective narrative that Longlegs has. In the first viewing, I was just so overwhelmed by the anxiety of each scene that a lot of things just went over my head. This is a fantastically paced drip feeding of information and suspense for a case to develop, with an unexpected twist at the end that makes a lot of sense. I've heard a lot of people compare this to Silence of the Lambs, and I think that makes sense. They're both detective horror movies with a standout performance by an actor that's not in the movie a lot, that plays a clinically insane serial killer. The lead is a young, inexperienced female detective with a connection to the psychopath in an interrogation scene which happens to be the best scene in its respective movie. Longlegs is definitely going harder into the horror aspect, which makes the supernatural elements flow into the plot better. Silence of the Lambs is unquestionably the better mystery narrative, but I actually think I like Longlegs more. And don't get me wrong, I love Silence of the Lambs. While they are close, and Silence of the Lambs absolutely clears Longlegs in certain categories, like how Anthony Hopkins is the clear better performance over Nicolas Cage, the interrogation scene is far better in Silence of the Lambs, but that's not really fair. That's one of the best scenes of all time. And the mystery is a better narrative start to finish. Longlegs makes up for all of that with its pure understanding of what makes everyone afraid. Stephen King outlines what he believes are the 3 types of horror that aren't caused purely by surprise, like a jump scare: the gross out, the horror, and the terror. The gross out is pretty self-explanatory, usually a large amount of gore or body horror. Longlegs has no shortage of this, whether it's a crime scene photo or a flashback to a gruesome murder, or a man with a deformed face, or even a maggot-infested corpse. Then there's horror. Horror is a depiction of the implausible that genuinely strikes up fear. It's not so much an aversion to something disgusting as it is an overwhelming survival instinct. Most of this film is built on this fear: a weird-looking stranger that approaches a little girl, a woman that sneaks up on someone with a shotgun. These are natural threats taken to the extreme. Then there's the best type of horror: the terror. Stephen King himself described terror as the feeling of coming home and realizing that everything you own is gone and is now replaced by an exact substitute. It's that bone-chilling feeling of fear and danger that's out of your understanding. And the examples of terror that Longlegs brings are some of my favorites I've seen. A 911 phone call of a man telling an operator that the little girl that he and his wife have raised and looked after for years isn't his daughter and was replaced by something, all overcut with happy family photos and crime scene evidence. Or an empty metal orb found in the head of a doll that sounds like it's beating. Or getting a phone call that ends up being just static until it turns into a mechanical voice that tells you your birthday. It's a fear that doesn't fully make sense, but still makes your heart drop the more you think about it. Forgetting every other aspect of this movie: great story, great performances, great filming technique, great camera angles, and just speaking on the feeling of watching this movie, I haven't seen very many films that can match this one. Longlegs is an immersive experience in dread, suspense, and horror. It truly succeeds in almost every aspect of great horror films. A movie so haunting, I am certain that the imagery of this film is one that will stick with me for years to come. I could see this instantly being a horror staple. Please do yourself a favor if you have any love in your heart for the horror genre whatsoever, and watch this movie. It may not be the best horror movie I've seen, but it really is up there. Thank you guys for watching, and let me know some of your favorite horror movies in the comments. Maybe someday I'll make a top 20. Other than that, I'll see you next time. Oh, and by the way, if you've already seen Longlegs and want to show it to some of your friends, do not say anything about the movie. I swear to God, everyone hyping up this movie is why it's now becoming cool to say that it's not good. I did this to some of my friends and I still feel bad about it. Alright, now I'm done. Thanks, guys. Next week we're doing Furiosa.